Hi, Whitney.
Welcome to the podcast where we acknowledge that the ways we are working really aren't working anymore.
We invite you into conversations with thought leaders, coaches, and industry experts to explore strategies for living with more ease and less grind, more flow and less fight. Welcome to Untrained. Hi, Whitney.
Good afternoon, Iris. It's afternoon because our special guest today is from California, so we're starting a little later. So our guest today is Dr. Cheryl Rogow, a professor, sports psychology consultant, and coach. She's also an invaluable mentor of mine. So we coach for the same company. She's been doing it a lot longer than I have. I sought her out as a mentor because I was like, that woman, I want to learn from her. And she's coached hundreds of women on this topic that we're going to talk about today, which is women and their voice, particularly when it comes to meetings. And she's so good at this that one of her clients asked her to create a training on this. And we've had many discussions and I've learned so many nuggets. And I'm excited to bring the conversation to our audience.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. Hi, Whitney. Hi, Iris. I'm very happy to be here. Excited to get going.
Yes. So the one other thing that we're going to introduce, because this is our new format, we talk about what we are untraining and then what we are retraining. So we're going to try and untrain this strategy that many women have of just sort of holding back and not knowing how to sort of own their voice in those meetings, really get their points across. And we're going to give you a lot of specific tools in order to be more present, have your opinions heard, and feel more comfortable in those meetings.
I like bullet points. And before we met, we had a pre-show meeting with Cheryl, and I liked what we talked about for untraining for this episode. So I'm going to do the bullet points.
Do it.
And this is from all three of us. We're untraining that women in male-dominated executive settings don't matter or don't have a voice. We're untraining them from societal labels on women when it comes to having a voice, speaking up, that they're too much if they're speaking up. They only speak when they're perfect. I think Whitney brought that up is, I can only speak up if I know everything and I'm perfect. I'm going to be a fraud when I speak. I really can't be myself. I have to perform as someone else, right? That imposter syndrome bit. We're going to untrain some of that. I hope they like me. That's one I hear a lot is like, if I speak up, I just want to make sure I'm saying things so people like me. Do they like me? And then also, I think we wanted to train that women in meetings are not secretaries. As much as you want to be the person to take the notes or, they're looking around like, hey, take the notes. You're not going to be that one. So I'm hoping in this episode, we're untraining. And then Cheryl, I'd love to throw it to you and say, if we can start somewhere with, what are we training at the top? What are we training? What are you training these women to do?
Okay, so I love your list of untraining, right? Because that is the springboard for what we're training, right? We're trying to train these women to actually feel as if they belong, right? They belong in those meetings. And in that belonging, they have a voice, right? A strong, confident voice, and they mean something, right? These women in these meetings, like we were talking about that last bullet point, like women are secretaries. I have a lot of clients who will be like, why me? Why am I the one that has to set up the dinner? Why am I the one that has to take the notes? Why is everyone looking at me for that? Right? When I'm a partner, just like these other people are, right? But I happen to be someone who identifies as a woman. Therefore, you're the one who's going to be assigned all those tasks. So I want women to feel empowered to say no, right? So I train them to have a voice in the sense of, if someone asks them, can you schedule that dinner tomorrow night? I want them to say things like, I would be able to, except I'm already committed to doing X, Y, and Z. Why don't we ask Bob to do it, right? Like having the confidence to say no and be okay with that, right? So that's part of the training. It's like showing up at these meetings, not feeling like they have to be the yes woman, right? And they could be the no partner if they need to be, if they don't want to do the task. Hey, if you enjoy those things, go for it, right? Own them. You want to take notes because you love taking notes. It keeps you engaged and you want to do that, volunteer for it. Fine. But don't feel like if someone tells you you must do it, then you have to say yes. Or we go back to another bullet point of they're not going to like me, right? They're not going to like me if I don't say yes, right? We want to make sure women feel, and people identify as women feel like, hey, you know what? I can go into this meeting and I actually can say no, and people will still like me. I can say no, and I could still feel like I contribute, right? Because a lot of women, they attach guilt to it all, right? If I say no, well, then I'm going to feel so guilty for saying no. And people identify as women already have so many things on their plate that they feel guilty about already. And it's like, we don't need to do that in these meetings. We don't need to add to that guilt. Right? For me, like, guilt is this unnecessary emotion that we carry around with us. And I say, like, women are pre-wired for guilt. Mm-hmm. We need to cut that guilt wire, right? I've written a lot of books in my head. I haven't actually written a ton of books, right? I don't have the time for it right now.
Cutting the guilt wire is one.
Yeah, cut the guilt wire, right? Like, it's true. Women are pre-wired for that, and we don't need to bring that into our corporate meetings as well. So it's one or two things.
Well, we've already talked about the socialization. There's a lot of ways women are socialized that makes it harder for them to have their voices heard in meetings. So one is like doing the extra stuff, the notes, the setting up, the planning, meetings, events, whatever that is. One is wanting to be liked, right? We're socialized to want to be liked. You know, women tend to give each other compliments. Women tend to apologize more often. Women tend to sort of ask things in nice ways with high pitch and questions rather than being assertive. And to the point of wanting to be liked, it's kind of like threading a needle, right? You can't go too far on either side because, as sort of Iris said in the bullet points, you don't want to be viewed as too aggressive or unlikable. And one of the ways we have heard this really described as how hard it is to thread the needle is in a popular movie lately, right? So I don't know, Iris, if you want to share that monologue that sent many of us weeping.
Oh, I cried when I heard America Ferrera from the Barbie movie talk about this. And I think it just talks about or highlights this socialization of women, of how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to show up. And the punchline, and I'll say it before I say the lines, is that we're just not sure. We're kind of caught in between doing too much, too little, and then on top of it all, spice in that guilt. So what they say, and I kind of cut it a little bit shorter because I'm not America Ferrera and I'm not an actress, but I will try to do my best. She should win an award for this.
Get fired up, Iris. Get fired up.
Like stretch out. You have to be thin, but not too thin. You can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer to men's bad behavior, which is insane. But if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be part of the sisterhood. But always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but always be grateful. So, this sort of underlines all of this is when clients come to us, they're just like, I'm just trying to show up to a meeting and I don't know what to say. Do I have to be loud? Do I have to speak a lot? Do I have to be prepared? Like, what am I supposed to do? So where do we begin?
Okay, so like when I hear that, monologue over and over again, it just feels very heavy, right? It feels like women just carry around so much weight, right? And it's like your head spins, but it spins in this way that society has constructed for us, right? And it's almost like when we work with athletes, right? We're like, okay, when you step on the field, that's all you're focused on, right? You got to let the other stuff go. Like that bagging technique, I don't know if you guys ever use it with your clients, but I actually create burn bags with my clients. Like I actually have them write down on small pieces of paper, like all those things that you just talked about, like all the things that they're carrying into these meetings, or with an athlete, all the things they were carrying onto the field. I have them write it down, stick it in a, non-toxic bag so they could actually burn it, right? Like they can watch it go up in flames because it's so heavy. Like we walk into these meetings and it's like, we're already weighted down. It's like, how can we even speak when we're like literally like, 100 pounds heavier than we are supposed to be? And so all the things that you just said in that monologue, like when you say it, I feel it, right? I feel it and I carry it for all my clients. I'm like, yes, it's exactly how they feel. Can't be too much this or too little that. And I have to be perfect and I can't be too perfect because if I'm too perfect, then everyone looks at me like, oh, she's too perfect. They don't like me because I'm not part of the sisterhood, right? Like, yeah. So like that burn bag, like my clients are like, yes, I need to do it. And then I have them like have their families get involved, right? I want them to teach it to their daughters now, right? To not carry that stuff around, or their sons or their spouses, right? I want them to realize like you actually control what you bring into a meeting, right? All that baggage does not need to come in with you just because society says it should, right? You can make a choice. You can make an intentional, deliberate choice to feel lighter when you walk into a meeting and not have all the societal demands and pressures on you, even though everyone in the room is thinking, oh yeah, she should fit into this little box, right? You don't have to choose that. We don't have to choose that, right? So like doing something like a burn bag is a very intentional way of letting that stuff go, right? Realizing that I don't have to carry that around. I don't need to bring it into a meeting, right? I can actually sit in the meeting and be engaged and be on topic and be lighter so I can have a stronger voice.
Yeah. And one of the ways that women tend to show up to meetings is like literally like bringing all this paperwork, arriving late because they're so busy, whereas the men tend to very often get to meetings early. And so this is actually a strategy that women can employ, like really thinking that the meeting, there's a lot of the meeting happening before the meeting, right? And how do we prepare for the meeting? One way is clearing our heads, as Cheryl's talking about. Another way is like physically getting ourselves to the meeting before to start having the conversation in the room. And another is really thinking about the pre-meeting. So I don't know, Cheryl, Iris, want to talk a little bit more about the meeting that happens before the meeting, socializing our ideas, getting really clear so that you go on to that stage of the meeting ready.
I'll just jump in real quick just to say that I'm an anxious person and I care a lot in a meeting and I care a lot about how much I'm speaking. I'm kind of almost like clocking it too. And I had someone actually say that it's like, Iris, you're still valuable in a meeting even if you're not speaking the whole time. But the pre-meeting is really important. And the two things I would say, and I'll just add this and then pitch it over to you, Cheryl, is one is write it down. I write everything down that I want to say just so that I have it, because I get really nervous within a meeting and I want to make sure that I have it on paper so that it prompts me. And then the second thing I would say is I get allies within a meeting. And you can't always do the like pre-chatting, especially in the Zoom era. It's a lot of transactional work. So what I'll do is before a meeting, I'll just say, hey, John, I'm going to talk about this. Can you tee me up? Or I've done that with you, Whitney. Hey, and you've done it here, like tee me up for something. Hey, can you tee me up to talk about this? Or I'll message them on Zoom and say, hey, I want to really insert this. Is this helpful or whatever? So sometimes having an ally there can help you. And also they can amplify your voice to say, oh, Iris had a really good point there. She said this thing. So sometimes it is super helpful, I think, for anyone, men and women, to have an ally within a meeting and do that pre-work, as to your point, Whitney.
I agree, 100%, right? It's about preparation. And I feel like a lot of my clients have issues with scheduling, right? They're back to back to back to back to back meetings. So that pre-meeting is hard to like engage in, especially on Zoom, right? So it's about preparation, but it's almost like preparing for uncertainty, right? You're not exactly sure what's going to happen in the meeting, but you have to be prepared for it. And I'm going to read a quote from James Clear. I love this quote.
Oh, I love
the ultimate form of preparation is not planning for a specific scenario, but a mindset that can handle uncertainty. right? So we need to enter these meetings with this mindset that can handle anything. Now, if we can create time in our schedules for the pre-meeting, like I suggest that to my clients too, right? You need to schedule a buffer before and after, right? So you're not in these back-to-back meetings, if at all possible. So you can engage in the pre-meeting. So you can create the allies that Iris is talking about, right? It helps. And there's an article that I shared with Whitney from Harvard Business Review, and I'm going to read all the names of the authors because I think it's important, right? So it's called Women Find Your Voice by Catherine Heath, Jill Flynn, and Mary Davis Holt. And the thing that I think is important about it was an article about women written by 3 women. Like whenever I read an article about women, I always look at the authors, right? Is it women or did a man just write that article about how women should behave, right? And so like, I love that article because it's from a woman's voice, or women who people who identify as women, right? It's from their voice. And I think to me, when we talk about this, it's really important to see if a woman is speaking about it or a man. Not that men don't have important things to say about it. They do, and they give a new perspective. And when we talk about allyship that Iris just talked about, I think that's super important to have people who don't identify as women as allies, right? And how do we create that? We could talk about that a little later if you guys want to. But that mastering the pre-meeting meeting sets you up for a higher probability of success, right? Because that's something you can control. You can control whether or not you're engaging with someone in the pre-meeting. And we talked a little bit about this in our pre-meeting, right? Was like, do you need to go and learn all about, what happened in the football game on Sunday for the meeting that's on Monday? If you want to, but you don't have to, right? How are you going to engage? It's like human to human interaction. Let's create a baseline of humanity entering into this meeting versus like men versus women. Or if you're the only woman in the room, it's like, is everyone staring at you because you're the only woman in the room? Or can you just engage like a human to another human and let's just accomplish what we're supposed to accomplish in this meeting?
I wanted to bring something. So we've talked about preparation, and I want to talk a little bit about during the meeting. And one of you guys said, I think this was Whitney, muscular language, which
it's from that article.
Oh, really? Because as someone who does CrossFit, muscular language is very appealing to me. So can you guys, and as a coach, I haven't heard that. So what is muscular language and how do I use that in a meeting?
Well, I have the slide right here because I turned it into a slide because it was so good. And I'm exactly the kind of person that tends to be like, how about versus I strongly suggest, or I think maybe versus I have a really, see, I can't even do it.
Are you working on your muscular language?
I'm working on my muscular language. Instead of I agree completely because maybe we can, here's my plan. Well, what if I recommend, right? And there can be a lower register associated with it, but it's pitch and it's words and it's pacing, like it's everything about the voice. Take it away, Cheryl. I just wanted to tee it up because I had it right in front of me.
Okay, so after reading that article, the one I just talked about, the Women Find Your Voice, this is something I use with so many of my clients. If you look at my text messages, like I'll be texting my clients mid-session, right? That little chart as a reminder. So if they're in a meeting, they can like pull it up and like remind themselves like, hey, and it's not, this is a distinction that I have to make with my clients. It's not masculine language, right? It's not a masculine language chart. It's muscular language. Mm-hmm. How can we be stronger? Not more man-like, right? But stronger. And so one of the most important things I feel like when we, talk to our clients in these corporate settings is like realizing that you have a choice, right? You enter into these meetings with a choice of, like Whitney brought up a great example, like high pitch versus deeper voice. Like I tend to have a deeper voice in general. Like it's harder for me to go to that higher pitch voice. Like what if did it? But some people are more naturally attuned to one way or the other. But in general, right, when we get into a meeting, whether it's a deep pitch or a high pitch, we're asking those questions versus like coming in with a committed statement, right? Because it goes back to what Iris was saying at the beginning about untraining. We want to be liked. So we think if we are like confronting another person's idea, we're not going to be liked, right? So we question it. We're like, well, how about this, right? No, it's like, I strongly suggest that, even though it may not agree with what this other person's saying, but I know that it brings another idea that maybe people haven't thought about. And I feel strongly about it. So I'm going to say it strongly. Not like you want to like put up your dukes and fight in the middle of a meeting, but it's about choosing the language that we use. Or for example, one of the things my clients say to me all the time is, well, I bring up an idea and then a man will come and say the same thing I said and take credit for it, right? It's all that credit taking issue. And so I tell them, instead of like getting into this little fight with them about, hey, that was my idea. Why are you saying my idea? I say, be very crafty about it. Like, choose your language very craftily. Say something like, thank you so much for reiterating what we spoke about yesterday. I'm so glad you brought that to light today. I really, really appreciate the support, right? When if you say it like that, you're reframing it in this way, like, instead of like, I hate you because you just stole my idea and brought it in front of everyone. It's like, wow, thank you so much. You're a rock star because you are bringing my idea to light, right? And it's almost like putting those people off balance a little. Like, wait a second, she actually liked that I took her idea and shared it with the group. Like, instead of like, oh, like I'm doing it and I can't wait to hear her response in this like nasty sort of way. No, it's like, oh yeah, thanks so much for bringing up that idea. I really appreciate you, bringing up what we spoke about yesterday. And I and then you say like your points, and people love that. Like, my clients are like, oh yeah, that's good. That's a good one. I'm writing it down. Going back to what Ira said, like, a lot of times writing down these little triggers for us in a meeting really helps, right? Reminding us. So like muscular language, that could just be written, or in the Zoom world, like have it on a board behind you, right? So it's reminding you of what to do, right? So this muscular language, I feel like it's a really, as cheesy as this is about to sound, a great way for people to identify as women to flex, right? In a meeting, right? Flex their muscular language muscle.
Yeah. Get the attention on them on that stage, on that corporate stage. And it doesn't have to be, it can also be a really well thought through question that makes everyone in the room think. It doesn't always have to be a statement, a way to get your idea or your presence known. You're
going to have to practice, because that's what I'm thinking in my head is, it sounds really good right now because we're talking and we're not under the stress. So it's just like you had said this before, as an athlete, that you might practice it, but once you get under stress and pressure to competition, it's a little, for us as fencers, like you might hit a little off because, you're under pressure. So just know, as you're practicing this language, that the practice is enough, and you're not going to hit it out of the park right away. You're not going to, drop the mic the first time that you're in the meeting, but maybe it's just little steps. We have so many meetings. Just keep practicing. And the one thing I would say is practice in something that's a little low level, right? So like something that isn't like, we're in C-suite meeting and there's all these stakeholders that are upper level than me, or whatever it is with the board. Maybe practice first with your team, or practice first with something that's not quite as stressful. So I believe in the practice. You've got to just do it. The only way through is to do it.
Right. Like we were talking before, like competition should be a natural extension of practice, right? And these meetings, they're not necessarily a big competition, right? They're smaller competitions. There might be bigger competitions coming your way, like the one you said, C-suite, et cetera. But if you think of these meetings at the time where all this practice that you're doing is going to culminate in this, performance, right? We're performing when we enter a meeting, and knowing that preparation helps, right? Just like an athlete. And with effort over time, things will change, right? So Whitney and I were talking earlier about the fact that there's not a lot of opportunities to practice pre-meeting. So I like how you brought up, like, these meetings are the practice, right? It's practicing for future meetings. And with the effort over time, practicing in these meetings, you'll get better at using muscular language. You'll get better at the preparation. You'll get better at the pre-meeting meeting, right? All of that, or better at, as the Women Find Your Voice article says, like, preparing to speak spontaneously, right? You'll get better at all of these things with effort over time, right? And seizing those opportunities when you can.
And to the point of the sports analogy, we're trained, we're trained in practice, then go to it in performance. And women aren't getting a lot of feedback, as it says in this article. And there isn't a lot of opportunity for training. So it can be really helpful. It's not helpful when people say, you should speak up more in meetings, right? What's helpful is if a manager says, I'd like you to present this tomorrow. Can you be ready? Or tease you up in a meeting, or afterwards says, I know you had a lot of ideas on that. Why didn't, what stopped you from speaking up? Can you share your ideas now so you can practice articulating them? So really thinking about how can I practice and where can I get more practice? Even if it's just, I'm asking myself after a meeting to say something out loud that I didn't say out loud in that meeting. And as I modeled, you're going to screw it up.
I wanted to underscore something you said, because I did have a CEO say, I'm trying to help this woman be more active in meetings and speak up. And he's like, I'm giving her a bunch of opportunities. I said, well, have you ever asked her, what keeps her from doing that or what she might need? And he's like, oh. So, you might feel like you're helping someone, but be a coach in that moment. Get curious about, what's holding you back? What can I do to help you to amplify your voice? What scenarios are you usually comfortable in? So you said that as one of the practices is, as a manager, if you're trying to help someone have a voice in a meeting, ask them a question, ask them to think about what's the biggest challenge, be their coach in that moment. I think it's not just the opportunities, but helping coach them through that process and giving them some feedback. Cheryl?
Well, directly related to that, in the article, it says proactively have women join the conversation, right? So you're right. Ask them a direct question if you're trying to help someone have a voice, right? But I love what you said about, well, have you asked the person? Have you talked to the person about the thing you're actually trying to help them with, instead of just assuming what they need? I can't say how many times I've said that to my clients, male and female, right? Hey, you're trying to help this person with this topic. Have you actually directly asked them what you can do to help them? Mm-hmm. Right? And they're like, oh, no, I haven't. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm like, all right, great. And then remember, the next time you're in this situation, you don't need me to tell you to ask them what they need. Just know to ask them what they need, right? I think it's hugely important, and it is these allies, right? Running allies in meetings, and maybe it's about talking ahead of time for these meetings. Hey, on this meeting, I want to bring up this point. Can you chime in? It's okay to strategize, right? You don't have to feel guilty about strategizing. People think they're cheating. It's not cheating. It's being resourceful. It's being effective, right? You're allowed to do things like that. Yeah, I want to caution people, we're talking about preparation, practice. Most of my clients have no time for any of that, right? It's I don't want people to feel like they can't enter a meeting unless they prepared for 6 hours ahead of time, right? That's not realistic. So it's also being confident and relying on your skills that you already have, right? These people identify as women that are our clients, they are badass, right? They are damn good at what they do, or else they wouldn't be where they are today. Yep. Right? So it's remembering that. It's remembering who you are and bringing that into the meeting, and get excited about sharing your ideas and sharing your voice, as opposed to oh, now I'm in this other setting and I'm going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and I'm going to lean back and back. No, sit up tall, get ready, get in there. You don't need to have prepared 6 hours ahead of time. You've prepared your whole life, right? You got to this point for a reason.
And some meetings are higher stakes. So prepare a lot for the ones that are higher stakes and use the lower stakes ones just to practice in. And I think the other thing, if we zoom back for a moment, what is the point of meetings, right? The point of meetings is to move things forward. And we know from the research, it's diversity of ideas and input and perspectives that makes for the best outcomes. So if you're sitting back and sitting on something, or if you're in a meeting and there's a couple people not speaking, you're a manager, or you're leading the meeting and there's a couple people not speaking, you're missing out on the outcome of the meeting being better. So hold that in the back of your mind too. Your idea might not be about you. Take the time to think that your idea might be valuable to the group versus have it all about how you're performing or if your voice is going to be heard perfectly.
I think that's partly because when we feel anxiety or fear, we're very focused on ourselves. When we feel comfortable and safe, it's much easier to focus on others. So one of the things I would say that I do with my clients is helping them with some sort of grounding practice that they can do that people can't see on Zoom or in person. Mm-hmm. So feeling your feet underneath you, a couple things, having your hands on the desk and feeling the desk underneath you. So sometimes you just need to be present with where you are. I think for me, as someone with a lot of anxiety, I can disembody. And I'm like, I'm not here anymore. So bringing yourself, I'm over somewhere in the atmosphere. But having some presence and being where your feet are really help you to think about that. Because if you are starting to think about how am I presenting and what does this look like? And if you're starting to feel that, it means that you're probably in a fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode. So you just need to calm the nervous system down, calm down the breath, and just put your hands. You can do some things physiologically in order to get yourself present into the moment.
And exactly what you just said, Iris, is what I talk to athletes about. Like, they take themselves out of the game, right? So you have one less athlete on the field when they're in their head, right, about what's happening in the moment versus being engaged in the play that's happening right then and there. And you're 100% hit on the head when you're talking about, like, you're in a meeting and you're thinking about, well, how am I presenting? Is my voice loud enough? Am I not loud enough? Am I smiling enough? Am I not smiling? Like, you're now just took yourself out of the meeting, right? You're not there anymore. You're somewhere else in your head having this whole conversation that has nothing to do with what's happening in the meeting, right? So it's about being present. And that's one thing I love about Zoom. Oh my gosh, like, these Zoom meetings, I'm like, you pump in lavender in that room to relax you. You can, like, have a stress ball in your hand, like, squeezing it the whole time, right? You can have one of those bike things on the bottom as long as you keep your upper body stable, right? Like, you be swinging your legs all you want, right? Like, Zoom made, I think, a conducive environment for comfort, right? You could be wearing your fuzzy slippers and pajama bottoms and you're, like, rocking it on the screen. I'm doing that right now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not.
Well, I was going to say also, we talked about preparation, the performance, and now for me, it's the replay. There's not a lot of credence given to the replay or the feedback. So when I was working, I had trouble in meetings too, being heard or being seen or being able to feel like I was contributing. So I would have my ally, spend 5 minutes just either slacking me, or I would call them really quickly and say, hey, how did that sound? What did you get out of it? What are the 3 points? That I'm working on this. So they became a pseudo coach, or they helped me give some feedback because I could be in my head, right? So after the meeting, I love what Whitney says, you can have a hangover about it, right? Like, I was too loud, I was too this, I was too that, and blah, blah, blah. But then having someone who has witnessed what you did can then give you the facts, or at least the facts from their viewpoint, right? So we've given you we've given you performance, but I think there is something to having someone you can talk to afterwards about the meeting.
And the one other thing I'll say about the post-meeting or the recover, prepare, perform, recover, is afterwards, especially if the stakes were high and you did get particularly anxious, like, that's when the book Burnout, we refer to this, Emily and Amelia Nagoski, take a break, move your body, eat something, get the anxiety out of your system before you go into the next meeting, because otherwise you're not going to have a hard time being present at the next meeting, and this can be harder to practice. So really take a few moments, or plan to take a little time, or whatever you need. If you need to text with your colleague, if you need to go for a walk, to manage the stress in your system.
I wanted to take a little bit of probably a different path here just once. Bear with me, come with me. We can always edit this out. But about authenticity, right? Because we're talking a lot about women, people who identify as women in male-dominated groups. And the dominating group is always going to set the standards, right? So maybe in that group, there's less collaboration, or no one's willing to write anything. But maybe in a different group, if you're in there being a secretary, quote unquote, is not seen as lesser, right? So the things that women do or are socialized to do might be seen as lesser. So now I'm thinking, okay, well, muscular language, these things, will I lose myself in that, right? Am I having to perform as someone else in order to be heard? And so I just wanted to say that as a comment. I have my own thoughts about it, but in the beginning, when I was coaching women, I'm like, am I coaching them to be someone else, or am I coaching them to be more of themselves? So I just thought I would put it out to you too.
I love that. I think you're coaching them to be more of themselves, right? And for some women, it may be out of their comfort zone to like be more muscular, right? Or I used to be a personal trainer, right? And women would be like, well, I don't want to lift weights because I'm going to get all bulky and look like a man. I'm like, no, you actually can't do that, right? Like you will increase your muscle mass, but you can't like increase necessarily your testosterone just by lifting weights and like you become this man, right? So it's about maintaining their authenticity, yet enhancing their abilities and skills to perform in a meet, right? So I think addressing that head on with a client is really important, right? Hey, this isn't going to change who you are, right? It's just going to enhance your ability to share who you are in a meeting, right? Because you are 100% correct. Your tools won't work if you're not being yourself, right? Like I had a tennis player who was like, I don't understand what happened. Like, I just didn't feel myself and nothing I was trying to use was working. And I said, that's exactly why nothing you were trying to use was working, because you didn't feel like yourself. So if you're not yourself, then the things you've used in the past for yourself won't work. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's about feeling like they're themselves. Now they're just enhancing their skills to be more effective in a meeting and sharing who they are with everyone. So I love that you brought up that point, because I think it is poignant, right? It's poignant. Like people need to know, like, hey, you can be yourself and just be able to share that more effectively in a meeting.
And I also think it just goes back to practice and permission slips. So if we hand you a permission slip to you don't need to know everything. You don't need to be 100% sure you're right, and you can still share your opinion. Great. Play with that permission slip. If we give you a permission slip to make statements rather than question, or rather than just sort of being more casual, find your own words. Maybe muscular language doesn't work for you, but play with it. Take the permission slip and play with it until it does feel authentic. And the other permission slip I would give you is that vulnerability is a part of authenticity. Right? We know from our guest Henna Pryor, like those awkward moments sort of lead to more trust and they can lead to authenticity. So we don't need to be afraid of our vulnerability in pursuit of authenticity. But I do think, to what Cheryl and Iris are saying, it needs to feel like us. And that might not happen right out of the gates.
The only thing I would add is, as someone who has parents who don't speak English as their first language, they're used to not being understood. So they'll explain however they explain, and people won't understand. So I think for me, when I'm working with someone, I think about that is you're actually a language translator, right? So if you want to be heard, you're going to have to make sure what you're saying is clear, and you got to make sure that it's going to get heard. And so it's after you do the burn bag and get rid of all the baggage, show up as yourself, and then find language so that you can be heard. And it's not because they're just not wanting to hear you, but they might not be understanding you, maybe the way you're presenting it. And I had great feedback before. Is one of my really good friends, he said, he was my ally after the meeting. He said, Iris, just be more clear and simple when you're presenting an idea. And he worked with me on that. I didn't change who I was, but I was heard more after that, because you just need to be able to translate the language so that people in the room, whoever is the dominant group, can hear you. Right. And I don't think it is shifting who you are, but it is just being, to your point, Cheryl, more effective in a meeting.
One of the things I work on with clients is the 3 C's of assertiveness communication, right? I know you love like all these little jazzy mnemonics, right?
By saying I love this, you actually mean that I don't love it. Correct.
That's my New York sarcasm coming out. Okay, so Like I just think, as a professor for 20 years, a good mnemonic is helpful for people just so they can be like, oh yeah, I'm going to this meeting. I got to be clear, confident, and controlled, right? Like that's what I think of as the 3 C's of assertiveness communication, right? And you're right. And there's also cultural issues in these meetings, right? Like I have a client, she's the only woman and the only like non-Indian person in the meeting, right? Sometimes because of the field that she's in. And she has that cultural issue in addition to being a woman, in addition to like a language issue. And it like there's so many issues, right? That she has to really focus on being very clear, like you said, right? But also confident and also controlled and remembering that and really, because assertiveness is like this continuum, right? From like passivity to aggression, right? And assertiveness falls like right in the middle there. You don't want to be too passive, but you also don't want to like have intent to harm people going into this meeting and being aggressive, right? So it's remembering like, okay, if I'm going to be effective in this meeting, I need to be clear. I need to be confident. I need to be controlled. And I even throw in concise in there, right? We talk too long, too much. People tune out. People shut down. People are like, wait, is she still going on? Like, I don't want to listen to what she's saying, right? So I'll add a 4th C, concise, right? So I think it's a good mnemonic for that. Like just right and before you go to a meeting, confident, clear, controlled, concise.
Oh, look, we added another C.
We did.
Yes.
4th C.
So Whitney, what were you going to say?
Oh, the only thing I was going to say is this podcast is a homage to experimenting with your voice, right? It was like we loved to have the conversations we had. We felt like we had things to share. We knew we weren't going to do it perfectly. We knew it would be an evolving journey. And we gave ourselves the permission slip to do it imperfectly and find our authenticity as we went. So we are putting it into action and finding our way ourselves on this very topic.
Yeah, you can find other places to practice rather than just meetings.
Yep.
So we kind of come to the end to conclude. So what are your famous last words? What do you want the audience to take away, Cheryl, from today?
Okay, so this is something I use with all the clients that I ever talk to, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, whether it's a friend, right? It's focusing on what you can control, period. Like my motto I go through with like coaching my girls U10 soccer team to my C-suite executives, right? If you use that theoretical underpinning in anything you do in life, right, you will be more successful. You will be happier, right? You will be at any ending to that sentence. So in these meetings, right, if we're talking about a voice in a corporate setting, focus on what you can control, which is not all these other women, non-women who identify as women, right? Like, or focusing on like what they're saying or what they're doing. It's like focus on your reaction to that, right? Because that's what you control. You don't control what comes out of their mouth. You don't control how they treat you. You don't control any of that, but you control how you respond to all of it, right? And I think for finding your voice, it's about choosing the opportunities to speak, choosing how you're going to speak, right? But also, I love what Whitney was saying about giving yourself permission to be human, right? We are not robots. We are not programmed and we enter a meeting and we spit out everything we're going to say just like we had planned it. No, it doesn't happen that way. Like, give yourself some grace, right? Give yourself permission to be human. Give yourself the opportunity to practice, give yourself the opportunity to grow, give yourself the opportunity to perform and do it successfully. But ultimately, it's focusing on what you can control to increase the probability of being successful in all aspects of life, right? I think that to me is the message that I want, my 9-year-old daughter to know, my 15-year-old son, my 13-year-old son, and like my spouse, and then everyone around me, right? Because to me, that's how people take control over their life. Right.
It's control over their C. It's the 5th C.
We have too many C's.
We'll have to write out all the C's after this. Well, we are so glad to have you on the podcast and thank you for joining us. And at the end of every podcast, what do we say, Whitney?
Well, I just want to say this is one of those moments. You had your moment when Lisa was on. I have my moment when Cheryl was here. I've been envisioning this, like maybe someday we could have Cheryl on. So this is a moment for Whitney, and we want to say, keep untraining.
Keep untraining. If you like what you hear and want to have continued content, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Untrained, or to anywhere where you get your podcasts. See you next time.